There's been a lot of discourse as of late about quarterback contracts in the past couple of years or so, and I feel like a lot of people have come around on the fact that usually paying the tier 2 or tier 3 level quarterbacks tier 1 quarterback money ends up kind of putting a ceiling on your team. To be a championship contender, usually you need to either have an elite level quarterback or a good quarterback who is on a reasonable deal, like Jalen Hurts only getting paid $13 million last year due to a heavily backloaded contract, or obviously rookie contracts, right? And I think that discussion is definitely interesting, and I think it's worth having, but I also wanted to turn my attention to edge rusher contracts, as that has been something that has also been talked about this past offseason, with both Myles Garrett and TJ Watt getting $40 and $41 million a year, respectively. But to talk about this discussion, what we first have to do is actually talk about edge value in general. And actually, this was right around when TJ Watt signed his most recent deal. I remember uploading a video talking about edge rushers and what is their true value. It actually was less about edge rushers and more about, I made a video where I was curious trying to see if I could figure out certain teams' positional value and how important certain positional value is. How important are receivers, running backs, offensive line? And to my surprise, one of the least important things that I found was pass rush. Essentially, I just looked at PFF grades from the top teams and the bottom teams over a 10-year span and found that pass rush tended to have the least impact when it comes to actually winning more football games. Now, that doesn't inherently mean that pass rush is overrated and not valuable. It could just mean that pass rushers are overpaid, and because they're overpaid, it means that they end up, that kind of puts a ceiling on what their true value ends up being. But still, I found it interesting that pass rushers was the second lowest category. The only one lower was the running game. But again, running game, you only have one running back on the field. Pass rushers, you have two. So you could argue it was actually the lowest value out of any other position. Some other things that I noticed were like, I looked at, teams that, if you finish in the top half, how often you were to make the Super Bowl. Something like wide receivers, consistently, teams that made the Super Bowl finished in the top half of the league at receiving. In fact, the only exception, since this data goes back like 15 years at this point, was the Kansas City Chiefs just last season, who, worth noting, didn't do very well once they got to the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, for pass rush, literally half of the teams to make the Super Bowl during that time span finished in the top half or bottom half. It's essentially, no change whether you finished the top half or bottom half in terms of how likely you are to, again, reach the highest of heights, get to the Super Bowl. This goes against everything we're taught as football fans, right? Pass rush, we all know, that's the second most important thing in football. But if you think about it, there's actually some logic behind it. Essentially, pressure on most plays is going to get there from 2.2 to 2.7 seconds. That's when you usually have a pass rusher who is getting to the quarterback, forcing the quarterback to have to make a decision. But when it comes to a player getting open, well, that can vary wildly. I mean, that can be, 1 second into a play. That can be 10 seconds into a play. And that's why, in some ways, I think that, essentially, there's enough good pass rushers, even bad pass rushers still are going to get there before too long has eclipsed. Whereas for receivers, if you don't have a great receiving core, it's going to take longer for that to happen. I also just think the game is changing, right? Downfield has been opened up more. Defenders can't play can't do as much. So because of that, it's if you're a really talented receiver, it's easier for you to get open under that 2.2 seconds before pass rush matters. I also think that quarterbacks are just better at evading pressure now. That has to be a factor. Also, it's tougher to hit quarterbacks without getting a flag. So when 1 out of every 10 quarterback hits results in you getting flagged, it then makes the value less there as well. I think part of why we always view pass rush, though, as important is that if you think about it, when you're watching the game, you don't see what's going on off screen. You only see what's happening on the screen, and usually that's just the offensive, defensive line, and quarterback. And anytime a quarterback gets sacked, you're always going to give credit to the player who made the sack, even if it was a longer play and, the guy was covered down the field. There are exceptions. There are plays when someone gets there before the play can develop and gets the pressure or the sack, but that's actually the exception, not the norm, if you actually look at these things. So, okay, some of you are with me and say, I guess pass rush is a bit overrated. Some of you aren't with me, but that's doesn't necessarily mean that there's no value to it, right? Of course, there is still value in having a good pass rush. So how do we measure how much value there is? Well, let's turn over to our good friends at PFF, who, again, not everyone's cup of tea, but I think they do some good stuff, albeit, nothing's going to be perfect when you're trying to apply stats to football. But they have a stat that I like called PFF War, where they essentially pay people who understand football to look at plays and essentially just evaluate what would have happened if that player wasn't on the field versus was on the field, and they create a wins above replacement stats. So again, just to be clear, them not being on the field doesn't mean they're playing with 10 guys. It means they're playing with just a replacement level guy in that player's place, and then calculating what the difference would be. For edge rushers, the highest I could find, it's not a status available to the public, so the highest I could find among what they do make available, usually among free agents in the past 3 years before they become free agents, was in 2023, Khalil Mack had a 0.59 WAR, or wins above replacement. He was the 5th highest graded player that year, so it stands to reason guys can have higher numbers than that, but still 0.6, that seems to be close to the ceiling. We can say 0.7, or maybe if you're really good, 0.8 or 0.9, but probably not too much higher than that. Let's just use TJ Watt as an example, who, again, I want to be clear, I think is an incredible player, and I think he does incredible stuff with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Don't take this as anti-TJ Watt. He's the highest paid player right now, so that's why I'm using him. For him to be worth the contract, just sign a contract, $41 million a year. Well, the NFL salary cap is a little bit over $279 million per year. The average team wins 8.5 games, meaning the average team spends $32.847 million per win. Meaning that for TJ Watt to just make that even, to be on a fair deal, he would need to be worth 1.2482 wins added a season, which again is over double what Khalil Mack had in the highest WAR season that I could find. And keep in mind, that's to have a fair contract, which isn't the goal. You don't want a bunch of fair contracts, then you end up in mediocrity. You want some great contracts. So, for example, if you wanted to build a 13-win team, well, that means you could only spend $21.4769 million, meaning TJ Watt would need to be worth over 1.9 wins per season, which again, we're now talking triple what Khalil Mack was able to do in 2023. Except not exactly. And this is where things get really complicated, but quarterback contracts change things. Essentially, the best contracts you can get are quarterback contracts. And that thing I brought up at the beginning, I talked about quarterback contracts. The reason why we tend to make such a big deal out of that is you only get one shot at it. You compare a Patrick Mahomes situation, statistically, he's usually worth 4 to 5 wins a season. If he's worth 4.5 wins and getting paid $45 million a year, that's $10 million a win. That's an insane ratio. You're not going to get that with any other position. Likewise, you have someone like Brock Purdy, who might be worth 2 or 3 wins, we'll say around 2.5 wins a season, but only getting paid $1 million, actually under $1 million a year. Again, you're not getting that kind of ratio with any other position. So you don't actually have to, for every other position, have the hit rates I'm displaying if you can get a really good quarterback contract, which the Steelers just haven't done really in TJ Watt's entire career. And that's why, there have been championship contenders who pay edge rushers big money, right? I mean, the Lions before Hutchinson went down. I guess he's on a rookie deal. But you have, Nick Bosa. They made the Super Bowl with him when he was on a big deal. It can happen, right? You could say, well, Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, 2 elite players, only 1 playoff win combined between the 2 of them. That's not very good. But again, I don't think it's quite that simple. I think quarterback contracts matter more than anything, and those 2 teams just haven't figured out the quarterback stuff. I do also think that, well, you could argue the contract itself, you're usually not getting the best value compared to other positions where you can get better value, even comparing to wide receivers or corners, which you can tend to get better value. The great thing about an edge rusher is how consistent they are. For a corner, you might have a good year and a down year. For wide receivers, it tends to be more consistent, but you still do have some variance. For running backs, you have some variance and injury variance. For edge rushers, once an edge rusher is great, they tend to just be great for their whole career. It's very rare for someone to have like 3 good years and then 3 bad years and then a good year and a bad. You'll have the occasional guy have like 10 sacks in a contract year and then go back to not being great. But usually, if you're great at rushing the passer, you're just great at rushing the passer or doing the other stuff with edge. And it's also just worth mentioning, like, there are other things that, other points of value that go into being an elite level edge rusher that just can't be measured even in like a PFF War, while they do say that they account for certain things like pressures that generate turnovers and things of that nature. Okay, how do you account for, the opposing team deciding to throw the ball quickly and change their game plan because they feel like they're getting crushed, or the opposing team having to use a running back to chip the elite edge rusher constantly and things of that nature? Well, I still think, for me personally, I just think with all the evidence and the contracts that they get, I still think I would go with the Raiders strategy of trading away Khalil Mack, getting a bunch of draft picks, and trying to use that, to build a team the other way. I don't think I would fully go with their strategy of then drafting guys who are projected to go in like the 3rd round with all their first-round picks. That maybe wouldn't be how I would do it, but I think that kind of logic makes sense to me personally. But I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, I suppose, to sign one of these contracts. It's just probably not what I would do. I do think it's different than if I'm trying to compare it to the quarterback contracts. I just straight up think when you pay the 13th best quarterback the top quarterback money, you're just almost never going to win a Super Bowl in that time frame unless you do a lot of other stuff really well. I don't think it's quite that extreme with edge rushers, but I do ultimately think that you're usually better off, making sure that you pay utilizing the value appropriately. And also just like, I think that if something tends to get overpaid, well, then maybe be smart about it in a way where you can take advantage of that. The Philadelphia Eagles, actually like what they do. They always draft a bunch of defensive linemen, but they rarely pay those defensive linemen. Usually they let those defensive linemen walk and draft more, so they're not actually paying a ton of money. So they still get the value, but aren't necessarily, building that way. But, I don't know. It's an interesting discussion. Let me know in the comments below. Do you have anything you would like to add to the discussion? Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.